quote, "For flood and fire and famine, she pays us back threefold." So anyone that knows Australia, it's definitely the Commissioner. Shane Fitzsimmons stepped into firefighting at age 15. His father George was a member of the New South Wales Rural Fire Service, so it was only natural, clearly, that Shane found his calling and his belonging. At age 19, he was appointed the brigade captain just up the road at Duffy's Forest, and a decade later, he took the role as Assistant Commissioner of the Rural Fire Service. In September 2007, he became the Commissioner of the Rural Fire Service, holding that leadership position for another 12 years. The then Assistant Commissioner described Shane as, quote, "I have never found someone who is able to be as supportive to people in need as Shane." He's at a Rotary then, because after all, he's a fellow Rotarian. And and of course, we shouldn't be surprised. I was very tempted to write the four truths here, but I'm glad Minor mentioned them. But I will mention that I think the Commissioner's work really aligns with Rotary's vision statement, which is, quote, "Together we will see a world where people unite and take action to create lasting change across the globe, in our communities and in ourselves." Since 2009, the Commissioner has been an honorary member of the Barara Rotary Club, and it's great to see so many members of Barara here tonight. But he's so much more than just an honorary member. He's also a Paul Harris Sapphire Fellow. So please join me in welcoming our hero without a cape, our fellow Rotarian, and the Commissioner of Resilience New South Wales, Shane Fitzsimmons.
Thank you, Matt, and what an uncomfortable welcome. Can I just acknowledge President Lyndall, of course, DG Lindsay, DG-elect Minor, as has been mentioned, my wonderful Rotary Club members from Barara, who on every occasion in Rotary events I always have a shout out. I feel like a bit of an imposter because I'm only an honorary member, but I'm there in spirit, and as I always say, a really small club that punches well above its weight when it comes to its commitment and dedication and achievement of so many things. But to fellow Rotarians, ladies and gentlemen, it's just wonderful to be here tonight and to be with people in a room and not just on TV screens or on computer screens. Yes, the ubiquitous nature of video footage and camera technology was in everyone's pocket back then, because I don't think I'd be standing here today. But what I found in the volunteer organisation was this ability to occupy my time, like so many others, and to be able to be part of something. The life skills of argument, of debate, of compromise, the ability to work through ideas, thrash out ideas, but seek to unite people with a common objective to do X, to do Y, to do Z, that would ensure that we make a difference in that local community. In 2009, where 173 people lost their lives effectively in one afternoon, with the convergence of a number of fires that moved across the Victorian landscape. But for us in New South Wales, we had 160 consecutive days of high-intensity firefighting operations that started in the north, as I say, and then progressively moved southward as more lightning strikes came, more fires ignited, and across a very moisture-depleted landscape. Leading into that season, 100% of the geographic area of New South Wales was drought affected or drought declared. The moisture deficit was like we'd not seen before, and 2019 went down in the history books as the hottest year on record for Australia and particularly New South Wales. 160 consecutive days of high-intensity firefighting operations, for 200 days of local bushfire emergencies declared in New South Wales. If you look back through history, you'll find that most of our fire seasons have a high tempo of operations that last 7 to 10 to 14 days before there is a weather pattern that disrupts that. We get some quiet time, and then we might get some more activity weeks or months later when things dry out again. Humanity on the uniting of spirit and commitment and dedication, the resolute and steadfast resolve of people coming together, working together, for the want of nothing but to make a difference, to try and save and protect as many and as much as they possibly could. And they did it day after day, week after week, month after month, 24 hours a day. Not only did we see an extraordinary optimisation of all available people and resources in New South Wales, but we were joined with teams from every state and territory across Australia, and we were also joined with the support of our colleagues from New Zealand, United States and Canada. More than 6,500 crews from outside our jurisdiction, from outside of New South Wales, came into our state and integrated into those teams and into those fire grounds to lend a difference. As I travelled the state, as I saw reports coming through, not only we see this remarkable contribution and effort in the fire and emergency services personnel, but we saw it in communities. We saw it in everyday people. People that were being displaced, people that were losing everything they'd ever worked for, people that were losing loved ones. We saw this remarkable, sincere outpouring of love and support and of compassion. People opening their doors, providing shelter for the night for people that were homeless or not knowing whether their home was even going to survive the fires. I remember very vividly a visit that I did with the Premier down into the south coast of New South Wales, and we caught up with a family who had returned to their home with some safety, but they were without power and without telecommunications, and we were driving around the street just seeing how people were going. And we bumped into this family and they got chatting to us, and they said that they'd been evacuated out of their area and went down further south for the night to a little community called Tomakan, and it was a place that wasn't as threatened by the fires, but there was thousands of people that were seeking some sort of overnight refuge, often just staying in their cars or in the park or in the surf club. But this woman came up to this family. A lady was holding a baby, a young toddler I should say, not a baby, and this couple had offered this lady and her child accommodation for the night, and this woman said, "Thank you, you're very generous, but we come as a package deal." And as it turned out, I think there was about 12 of them, or 13 of them. They ranged in age from about 3 or 4 through to 80-something years of age. But not only was that whole family unit together, they'd also brought with them from their home a couple of rabbits and a dog and something else. And to this family's amazement, the couple said, "That's no problem, we'll accommodate you. We've got space downstairs, we'll stay upstairs." And it was that sort of story that we heard over and over again that epitomised this remarkable generosity, this sense of community, where people were bending over backwards to make a difference, a positive difference in the lives of others. The best breakfast they think they've ever had. The couple really looked after them. So there were so many of those sorts of stories, and it's that spirit of community. It's that spirit of lending a hand, that mateship, that cultural attribute of Australia, that when the chips are down, we get in and we lend a hand. Really briefly, and then I'll reflect and conclude on what I've learned about resilience. For me, the leadership attributes that are fundamental in crisis, as they are indeed in routine day-to-day business life or organisational life. Leadership is all about trying to build trust and confidence. And if we're trying to build trust and confidence, it's even more so critical when it comes to times of crisis or times of uncertainty, like we've been experiencing over the last few years now with consecutive disasters and events and challenges. But to me, authenticity is the number one thing. We've got to be really real and honest with ourselves about who we are, what our limitations are and what our strengths are. But when it comes to the crisis, we've also got to be realistic with people about what we're dealing with. And to coin a little bit of a crude phrase, I remember growing up as a kid that being told that every now and then you just get dealt a dog foot sandwich that you've got to deal with. But if that's the case, as leaders, we can't cover that sandwich in hundreds and thousands and convince people it's fairy bread. They will work it out pretty quickly. So the more authentic we can be, the more realistic we can be with the challenges, with the circumstances, with the situation, we don't overstate it because we'll be seen to be exaggerating and alarmist, and we don't understate it because we're seen not to be taking it too seriously, and all we do is build apathy and complacency, which is the last thing we need. I think it's already been mentioned tonight that humility and empathy will be the second primary attribute from my perspective. Leaders need to remember it's actually not about them, it's about everybody else. They need to not take themselves too seriously, but take their role and what's at hand extremely seriously. The more we can understand about others, our teams, our subordinates, our colleagues, our supervisors, and of course our community, our customers, the greater chance we've got of understanding and connecting and trying to deliver information and garnish support and build that trust and confidence. As a kid, my sisters and I, there was a phrase that was instilled in us as long as I can remember. Manners cost you nothing, but the lack of them can cost you everything. And as we transition into leadership, that whole connotation around manners for me centres around genuinely valuing and appreciating that not everyone thinks the way you do. Not everyone has the same perspective or is looking through their particular set of circumstances with the same perspective that you've got. They will have different perspectives. And all those perspectives, all those backgrounds, all those divergent views and opinions are so critical in times of crisis to being absorbed into the equation, to being captured, to being heard, to being understood, if you want to try and make and affect the best decisions possible. You've got to have robust debate. You've got to challenge and work through and scenario plan and hypothecate somewhat in order to work out what you think is the best thing to do. And it can be tense, it can be difficult. And in times of crisis, you don't have the luxury of procrastination or getting more research. You've got to make a call. But in the throes of those deliberations, we've just got to remember those manners. It's civility, it's precision, it's courtesy. It's actually about inviting the inclusion in, particularly from those that think differently to us, to make sure we're getting the best picture we can in a very truncated time pressure environment, and knowing that people are there to do their very best. No matter the situation, we've got to make decisions and take action. But when we make those decisions and we take those actions, our focus has got to be on explaining not just the what, but the why. If we want people to be coming with us, we've got to explain that we're doing this, we're seeking people to do this, we're taking this action, we're not doing this, and these are the reasons why. Hopefully our ability to explain and understand helps us garner that trust and confidence, helps us garner that following and support and contribution to the broader effort. Communicating, in my view, is fundamental, but our job in times of crisis, and routinely I think, but certainly in times of crisis, is to de-jargonise, use plain English language, keep it simple as you possibly can, and remember your audience at all times. I know when I was doing a lot of those press conferences with others, I always kept two broad audiences in mind. The men and women on the front line and behind the scenes that were involved in the firefighting effort, and then all those men and women communities that were being impacted and affected, or indeed that were being threatened by the next wave of weather or the next potential run for the fire. And in everything we tried to put across, the message was really simple. Be as honest and as open as we can about what the latest information is and where we get that from, what that's telling us. What do we expect with that information? What do we expect is going to happen? Then we're really clear about what we are doing, and as I say, why we are doing that. Then what we're not doing or we can't do and why that's the case. And then importantly, what do we want others to do? What are we seeking others to get involved in this equation to help make the difference with what we're confronting? So communicating is fundamental, and that's internal and that's external communications if we're trying to harness that effort and that support. And the final thing, which we don't talk enough about, I think, in leadership circles, is that leaders actually need to care. Leaders need to care about the role they've got, the organisation that they're a part of, the effort that they're a part of, the challenge that's confronting them, and most importantly, they need to care about their people, their teams, their colleagues, their supervisors, and of course, their customer, or the community. If leaders don't care, then the question is, why are they there? And if the leaders don't care, in my view, it'll come through in things like arrogance rather than authenticity. It'll come through in disrespect rather than empathy and humility, all those sorts of things. And our messaging, our communication, if we do it with care and we simplify language and we talk to people like they're people, we will have a better chance of resonating and seeking to achieve what we're there for. I think the other critical aspect of care, and we've certainly seen it ongoing in these last couple of years, is that care in times of crisis for leaders is about presence. Not asking others what you're not willing to do yourself. Letting them know that you've got your back, that you've got their back. Letting them know that you understand and appreciate the challenges that are going on. Let them know that if they make a decision and it doesn't actually go to plan, but you've made the best decision you can, then it's going to be supported and backed in. And also leadership in times of crisis, and I unashamedly attest to this. It's okay for leaders to be vulnerable. I was emotionally broken on a number of occasions during the fire season, particularly with the toll that was occasioned, the loss of life, the loss of our firefighters, the time and engagement with families and loved ones, and of course funerals and other memorial services. It was truly awful, and the grief and the loss was very real. So I think they're the sorts of things that I find are really important when it comes to leadership and how we apply ourselves, no matter who we are. Leadership is at all levels of an organisation. Some people have just got a different role to be more visible than others, but leadership is an individual collective responsibility that's shared right throughout any organisation or any effort when it comes to that crisis. And then I'll just conclude on my reflections on resilience. And I remember being in discussions with the Premier and the Minister and the Head of the Public Service in accepting this new role to Resilience New South Wales. But at the time that I accepted the role, it was going to be an organisation called New South Wales Disaster and Emergency Management, something like that. And as a simple firefighter, I kind of got that and understood it. But when it got closer to being announced, it was decided to call this new organisation Resilience. And I remember saying, what the bloody hell's resilience? How do I sell resilience? What is that even going to mean to anybody? The word itself means different things to different people, and it's not used very much. And I was told to calm down and just absorb it and and move on, which I did. But what it caused me to do was really think about the word resilience. And I know I had a radar up since taking this role on back in 2020, but I can in all conscience say, I don't in my life remember a period of time like we've seen in the last 18 months or 2 years, where I've seen the word resilience used so much. Whether it's our own family conversations, whether it's our social debates, whether it's our mainstream media, social media, when you're sitting in boardrooms and team meetings in the workplace, everyone's talking about resilience and they're factoring into everything. I was a bit spooked because it reminded me of the 90s where no one could really articulate what they were saying. They just used the word strategic and it just kind of covered everything. But this word resilience really got me thinking in a very serious way, because heading up this new organisation, whilst the fire season was unprecedented, the damage was unprecedented, the toll was unprecedented, so too was it that the recovery effort would be unprecedented for the state of New South Wales. Record amounts of money, billions of dollars worth of investment. We're up around $5 billion now or more with the fires and floods and other things across New South Wales, but more than $4 billion just into the bushfires alone. And as I travelled around and caught up with people, I read a bit and listened a lot and reflected a lot on my own experiences, and I challenged myself, what do we mean when we say resilience? And there's a couple of things that I've convinced myself of. Number one, I don't support the simple definition of resilience that we find whenever we pick up a dictionary or we go online and search the word resilience. I think you'll find invariably it says something like the ability to bounce back to normal after big disruption or big disaster or something like that. Well, I call BS on that definition. Number one, what is normal for anybody these days? And why would anyone want to bounce back to that state and be just as vulnerable to whatever's displaced them again? So it just doesn't make sense to me. And I think it's Einstein that says that the definition of stupidity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. So clearly, the more you talk, the more you learn, the more you listen, the more you learn. And I've convinced myself that resilience is really about learning through lived experiences, learning through life experiences, not only your own lived experiences, but the lived experiences of others, so that we're better able to understand, appreciate, and anticipate the sorts of things we might be vulnerable or susceptible to. How can we do something now to ready ourselves, to prepare ourselves, to limit impact, to hopefully prevent it. But if it occurs, how do we endure that displacement or that event? And how do we come out the other side more learned and more experienced, so that we're better able to adapt and adjust our skills, our equipment, our environment, our whatever. So we're better off the next time round. So learning through lived experiences is really important. And we're seeing that. If you want to look at resilience and the challenge, then reflect on your own lives in the last couple of years. Reflect on New South Wales and Australia. I talk about the bushfires deliberately, but preceding the bushfires was one of the worst droughts we've had in centuries. 100% of the state was drought affected, drought declared. Communities were already on their knees with the drought. They were then absolutely belted by the bushfires. The bushfires eased up in February of 2020. They eased up all right, and across a very denuded landscape, we saw significant rainfall that resulted in storms and floods and erosion and landslides and all sorts of displacement across so many parts of the state. That was in the February period. By the time we hit March and April, we were already well and truly into the profound impacts of COVID, the first onsets of COVID during 2020. We then went straight through 2020 with all sorts of challenges and restrictions. All the invigorated energy to get out and start rebuilding and helping communities after the fires was all quashed by the time we hit Easter, and everyone had to curtail their travel and their spending to lift the spirits and morale of bushfire impacted communities. December 20, when we were marking the anniversaries of some of our fallen firefighters and other communities, we were chatting on the way home one night, and it was an emotional conversation. We were reflecting on the loss, and we were reflecting on former mates that had died. And we got to the conversation, and I asked him how he was going with his emotional and psychological well-being. Was he still getting the help? He said yes, he was. He said it was making a great difference. And I said, that's fantastic. And he said, yeah. He said, it's really helping. I said, how? And he said, well, I didn't realise how much I was shutting my wife out. He said, I realised I wasn't being the best father I could be. And he said, I wasn't doing all that I could in the workplace. I wasn't being good with my team, my volunteers and my staff. And I said, so is it helping you? And he said, yes, it is. And I said, that's great, mate, keep it going. He said, oh, no, absolutely. So I'm going to keep going because it's really helping. And he said, before you go, Shane, he said, can you promise me something? I said, what's that? He said, can you promise me you won't tell anyone? I said, promise me you won't tell anyone what? And he said, I don't want you to tell anyone that I've been getting help. I said, you've got to be flipping kidding. I didn't use the word flipping. I said, after everything we've just been talking about, what's the problem? I said, what's the shame in actually me telling anyone? And his words to me were, I don't want to be judged. I don't want people to think that I'm not coping. And he went on a little bit about that, but then one of the things that was really important was, he said, most importantly, I don't want people to think that I'm not capable of coming back to work, because I know coming back to work is a really big part of my healing process. It's a really big part of me moving on and sharing and connecting with others. And then over and over again, as I travel around the state, I bump into people that say, can someone talk to mum and dad on the property? Can someone get down and see such and such in the local business? They wander around the property, they're trying to rebuild, they won't put their hand up for help or assistance, they think there's people worse off than them. Don't think about getting one of those bloody shrinks out, because they're not going to have their head read, and they're going to dismiss that like nothing else. And I said, why aren't they getting help? And they say, Shane, we're really worried. We don't want them to give up on hope. We don't want them to find that what they're confronting is so overwhelming they can't see a way out. These are very real and genuine concerns that people have. We are kidding ourselves if we overlook these things around trauma and grief and emotional toll that's occasioned to all of us when we live through these things. I'm going to be a little bit controversial and say, I think it's old, white, bald people like me that have got the biggest lifting to do. Because as I've grown up, the cultural dimension is that men somehow can't have emotion. Men can't be impacted or affected emotionally by these big events. They've got to be the strong, tough, solid people going forward. But it's in us all to actually share and open up. We've got to start with opening up with the person we see in the mirror and giving ourselves permission that it's actually okay to feel challenged, to feel displaced, to feel uncertain, to be worried, to be actually grieving or concerned or troubled by what we've experienced. And I'm willing to bet you, based on my own lived experience, that if you give yourself permission and then you start talking to colleagues, talk to loved ones at home because they worry about you enormously, open up and let them know that you've got this level of anxiety or you still see things or hear things, you will find that despite the facade that we all put up, that you're not alone. Other people have got the same challenges. So when you can start helping one another, and most importantly, give each other permission and normalise the fact that it's actually okay to reach out for support and assistance, we'd all be doing a lot better, particularly those that have suffered so much profound impact and displacement across the state. There's three phrases that have really stuck with me, and they came out very pronounced when I visited the Cobargo Public School and spent some time with kids, and I visited the Braidwood Arts and Crafts Centre, where they put a big display centre up where people from the community, adults and children alike, had collected stories and photographs and artwork to capture the memories and thoughts of what they'd lived through during the fire season. But then similarly with the Cobargo kids at school, they did the same sort of thing. They worked together as classrooms. And there was three very consistent phrases that came through for me, and particularly from kids. I think there's a lot for us all to learn as adults. They're unfiltered, they're unchecked when they share their thoughts and feelings. But they started commonly, when they started opening up and talking to each other, they realised the first phrase, I am not alone. You know, I think I'm the only one that's going through this, but when I start talking, I realise I'm not, and other people have got answers and experiences that can help me. And also when I open up and I'm talking to somebody else, I can assure them the second phrase, you are not alone. And then the kids all worked out together that if they all talk with one another, we are not alone, and that's what helps them and lifts them through and gets through those challenging times. So ladies and gentlemen, we are not alone. And resilience is a real thing. The challenges and the experience of the last couple of years cannot be ignored. We've seen some remarkable spirit throughout communities right across New South Wales and further afield. And there is no doubt that service clubs, Rotary clubs and others are a critical part to that social fabric of resilience, of strength building, of learning, and putting things in place that help us be stronger and more viable as we go forward and face the challenges that will come. Hopefully not this year or next year. Hopefully we're going to turn into 22 as a lot better than 21, but they will be there. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to take questions on any of that or anything else.
Wow.
That in the decades that I've been involved in fire and emergency services, we've got very strong partnerships and collaboration with the United States, with Canada, with New Zealand, lots of Asia, lots of areas around the world. Yes, traditionally a lot of our large capacity aircraft that we contract out for seasons is shared between Australia and our colleagues in America, Canada and Europe. And what we found over the last decade or so particularly is that the seasons between the northern and southern hemisphere are getting longer. So the competition for the same resources has been challenging, which is why we were able to mount an argument some years ago with the state government to buy a dedicated, first of its kind, large water bombing aeroplane here in New South Wales, the 737. It's here all year, and since we've had it, it's helped every state and territory of Australia. We've sent it back to America to help when we've had quiet times. So we are sharing and maturing as a world. Lessons learned are not just waiting for them to happen to us, but we learn from one another. And as I mentioned earlier, we brought on board 6,500 people from across Australia, NZ, Canada and the United States. And because over the last few decades, we've shared and developed common command and control systems, all our phraseology and technology is very similar, although I'll just digress a little bit. When we first started doing this many years ago, we sent teams to America, and one of our senior commanders was in a management team in America, and they put a call down the line to protect a village. They needed, I think, 12 tankers to help shore up protection in this village. In Australia, we knew what tankers were. They were big red fire trucks, right? But in America, tankers were C-130 Hercules aeroplanes. So when they were putting up the call for 12 tankers, I think the message went down the line saying, "There's bloody Aussies. What do they think they can just call up 12 C-130 aeroplanes?" But that's going back a few decades. But such has been the learning and the interoperability that we've now refined that, so that when we arrive over country or they come over here under reciprocal arrangements, we're able to do a really simple induction day, and all the arrangements and systems are basically similar. So yes, we do a lot of reciprocation, a lot of resource sharing and that sort of thing, but we are seeing more and more dedicated specialist apparatus and equipment being more present in Australia, but we still run that seasonal contract work as well. The second argument around data and technology, I just think back on my couple of decades, 3 decades or so with the service, and there's things happening today that we weren't even contemplating a decade or 2 decades ago. The onset of internets, the onset of computer systems, the onset of social media, everything from our predictive services, our fire behaviour, weather analysis and forecasting, our predictive modelling to identify what rate of spread and where a fire might go given the conditions and the landscape. It's all becoming more and more routine, but it's one of those adages, the more you do, the more that's expected, and we know what we know now, but we don't know what we don't know is coming around the corner. So we're really working in a very collaborative way, domestically and internationally, to stay ahead of and at the bleeding edge of technology advances, making sure we try to avoid being driven by technology, but how do we ensure we've got the right engagement in technology as the enabler or the facilitator to grow and develop what we've got going on, and there's a lot of collaboration in that space.
Thank you, sir.
If that makes sense.
Yep.
Got a final question from our SES local Euro Greg.
Yeah, well, run that term rather loosely. Hello Shane, my name is Greg. We're obviously very pleased to have you here tonight, very honoured to have you here tonight. You mentioned a number of things about leadership, and a couple of things that really struck me is the one about humility and empathy, and that's something that I think this evening you've really enforced that's something that we've admired in you, and we really thank you. Because I think we remember the bushfire season of 2019, 2020 as a very significant part in our history, and you were certainly for the forefront of that, and we thank you for what you've done there. My question is, are we better prepared today, Shane, than what we were going back a couple of years, 2 or 3 years? What has changed, and can we feel confident that when events like this come along again, and they will come along again, we know that, is our community better prepared? You talk about resilience, and so what are your thoughts on how we're going to go forward in the future season? Thank you.
Thank you, crikey, how much time have you got? The simple answer is unequivocally, yes, we are better prepared than we ever have been. Our investment in resources, people, skills, competencies, capacity and capability is at a level, not just within one agency, but across the broader sector than we've ever seen before. It's a natural evolution of what's been before us, and the many hundreds of millions of dollars that are being invested in recommendations from the Royal Commission, the independent inquiry and other things that have come out of the fire season is no doubt. And similarly, through SES and other broader disaster lenses, there's a lot of improvement that's occurring. I will reinforce that point, but I'll qualify it by saying this. I don't know what the answer is. I love Australian culture, I love the mateship, I love the values, I love everything that attaches to it. And one of the great old Aussieisms is she'll be right, mate, no worries. Right? But it's that she'll be right, mate, no worries that is all wrong when it comes to us as individuals accepting responsibility and understanding our risk and exposure to hazards and disasters and what we can do about it individually. We invest as agencies and governments and communities a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of money trying to lift community preparedness. It's a shared responsibility. Being prepared and ready for the next event is not the responsibility of government or one government. It's not the responsibility of one individual. It's a collective responsibility at a community level. Ironically, I'm willing to bet you the best prepared bushfire people right now in New South Wales will be the ones that least need to be. They'll be the ones that were absolutely impacted and affected by the 2020 fires. They will have all those experiences and those horrors fresh in their mind, and they'll be doing everything around their property to be properly prepared. But ironically, the fuel's all been burnt. So the likelihood of that scale of fire occurring in the next couple of years is low to remote. But what doesn't translate, in my experience, is that the people that weren't impacted and affected during 1920 fire season are the ones that need to do the most preparation and the most work around their property, and they're probably doing the least. I know it's a bit out there, but that would be my view. And if you think about it, the vast majority of the fires, the closest they got to Sydney was the Hawkesbury Central Coast region, the back end of the Central Coast, and down through parts of our Southern Highlands and the Winchcaraby Wallandilly regions. We did not have fires in a lot of the traditional fire paths where there's dense populations of the northern beaches, the hills, the Lane Coves, the northern suburbs, Upper North Shore, Western Sydney and Sutherland and other places. So the answer is, yes, I do believe genuinely we are better prepared. I think there is a greater awareness. I think COVID has been a leveller that reminds everybody, no matter who they are, where they are, what they are, that we are susceptible to disruption and displacement. And I think it's causing us all to think a little bit more about the priorities in life going forward. I genuinely hope that translates to people where they live and where they work and where they choose to holiday. How do they assess their vulnerability, and how do they invest in the little things, the no-cost things that can make all the difference to the survivability of themselves, their family, their homes and their property. So there's that ever challenge of getting community engagement and community effort to take that shared responsibility for what they've got responsibility for.
Well, I think everyone would agree that was absolutely inspirational. Certainly I think all of us have more meaning around things like accountability, humility, empathy, care, communication, and of course resilience. So thank you so much, Commissioner, for spending the time on a busy career to come here tonight, and we really do appreciate it. So please put your hands together again. District Governor Lindsay May.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, everybody. Look, we're here to do a commercial, and that's about the district conference, which is on March 18th and March 19th. I cannot guarantee that we are going to have speakers of the calibre that you have heard this evening, but we've worked very hard to just get to the next level below that. However, Commissioner gave the Australia Day address in Sydney last year, and we have coming this year
2022 Australian of the Year and became the Australian of the Year. And he's quite a lovely young man with an amazing dream and a huge volunteer workforce behind him now. And so he's quite happy to come along and chat to us on the Friday night for dinner.